The German Shepherd hit the kennel gate so hard the bolts cracked. 90 pounds of muscle and fury, teeth bared, eyes wild, a sound coming from his chest that made two combat-trained handlers stumble backward. They'd tried everything. 5 handlers, 3 behaviorists, 6 weeks of failure. The Navy's most elite military working dog was now scheduled to be destroyed. Then a SEAL named Marcus Reed did something no one expected. He brought the dog to an 8-year-old girl. What happened in that backyard didn't just save the dog, it saved everyone. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. Subscribe and stay with us until the very end. The sound was the first thing Marcus Reed heard when he walked into the canine compound that morning. A deep, guttural snarl, followed by the crash of a 100-pound body hitting reinforced steel. He'd heard men scream in combat. He'd heard explosions that shook the ground beneath his boots. But the sound coming from that kennel was something different. It was rage wrapped around grief, and it hit Marcus in a place no amount of training had taught him to protect. "Stay back, petty officer." The senior handler, a thick-necked master-at-arms named Briggs, held up his hand without turning around. His eyes stayed locked on the gate. "He's been at it since 0400. 3rd time this week he's tried to break through." Marcus stepped closer anyway. Through the reinforced mesh, he saw Storm. 5 years old, German Shepherd. Tan and black saddleback coat that used to gleam under sunlight, but now looked dull, matted, neglected. Not by the staff, but by a dog that had stopped caring whether he lived or died. His muscles were still powerful, coiled tight beneath his fur, but they fired without direction. Every sound triggered a lunge. Every movement drew a snap. His eyes, dark, wild, burning, tracked everything in the room like everything in the room was a threat. "How many handlers?" Marcus asked. 5, Briggs said flatly. "Peterson lasted 2 days. Garcia made it to 4. The last one, Rivera, he's still in medical. 32 stitches in his forearm. Storm pinned him against the kennel wall and wouldn't release for 6 minutes." "What'd Rivera do wrong?" Briggs turned and looked at Marcus with the exhausted patience of a man who'd been asked that question too many times. "Nothing. He did everything right. Textbook approach. Calm voice, open body language, hand extended. Storm let him get within 2 feet, then went for the arm like Rivera was an enemy combatant." He shook his head. "This isn't a training problem, Reed. This is a dog that's decided the world is a combat zone, and everyone in it is hostile." Marcus watched Storm pace, back and forth, back and forth. The tight, relentless circuit of an animal whose body couldn't outrun what was happening inside his head. "He wasn't always like this," Marcus said. "No," Briggs agreed. "He wasn't." 6 weeks ago, Storm had been the most requested military working dog in naval special warfare. SEAL teams asked for him by name. His detection record was flawless. 23 confirmed explosive finds across 3 deployments, any one of which would have killed the men walking behind him. He could clear a building in half the time it took other canines. He could track a human scent through rain, wind, and darkness, with a precision that made experienced operators shake their heads in disbelief. His handler had been Chief Petty Officer Ryan Holt. Everyone called him Ironside. Marcus called him brother. They'd come up through the teams together. BUD/S, Advanced Training, First Deployment. Marcus was the operator who moved through doors. Ironside was the handler who sent Storm ahead to make sure those doors didn't kill anyone. They'd saved each other's lives so many times, the debt had stopped being a number and become a permanent state of existence. Then came the extraction. Marcus's jaw tightened at the memory. He didn't need to close his eyes to see it. It played behind every waking moment whether he wanted it to or not. A classified night operation. Hostile territory. High-value asset retrieval. Storm and Ironside on point, moving through a compound with the silent precision of men and dogs who'd done this 100 times. The intelligence was supposed to be solid. The route was supposed to be clear. It wasn't. The ambush hit from 3 positions simultaneously. Muzzle flashes from rooftops. RPGs screaming through the darkness. The extraction point turned into a kill zone in the space of 3 heartbeats. Marcus was 15 feet away when Ironside took the rounds. He heard them hit. He heard Ironside go down. Not a scream, just a heavy, sudden absence of movement that was louder than any explosion. He heard Storm's whine, piercing, desperate. The sound of an animal who understood what had happened before any human in that compound did. Storm positioned himself over Ironside's body. Didn't retreat. Didn't follow the extraction order the team leader screamed through the chaos. He pressed against his handler, shielding him with his own body while rounds tore the air apart above them. When the team finally pulled them both out under covering fire, Ironside was gone. Storm survived without a scratch, but something inside him didn't make it home. "Command signed the paperwork this morning," Briggs said, pulling Marcus back to the present. "Final euthanasia authorization. He's got 6 days." The word hit Marcus like a round to the vest. 6 days. They've given him every chance, Reed. Behavioral specialists, veterinary intervention, extended rest. Nothing works. He's put 3 handlers in medical. He destroyed the training yard twice. Yesterday, he chewed through a reinforced leather muzzle in under 4 minutes. Briggs exhaled. "He's suffering. Everyone can see it. The kindest thing—" "Don't," Marcus said. "Don't tell me the kindest thing is killing a dog who watched his handler die protecting us." "Then what do you suggest? Because every expert on this base has tried, and that dog in there has told every single one of them the same thing. Leave me alone, or I'll tear you apart." Marcus stared at Storm. The dog had stopped pacing and was standing rigid in the center of his kennel, head low, shoulders bunched, eyes locked on Marcus with an intensity that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. But Marcus had looked into those eyes before, in the field, on deployment, in moments when Storm's focus was the only thing between the team and an IED buried in packed earth. Those eyes weren't just rage. They were searching, scanning for the one thing that made sense in a world that had stopped making sense the night Ironside stopped breathing. "I want custody," Marcus said. Briggs stared at him. "You want what?" "Personal custody, temporary. Give me the 6 days. Let me work with him." "Reed, that dog sent Rivera to medical with 32 stitches. Rivera's been handling canines for 12 years. You're not even a handler." "No, but I was there the night his handler died. I was 15 feet away, and I've been carrying the same thing he's carrying ever since." Briggs opened his mouth, then closed it. Something shifted in his expression. Not agreement, but recognition. The look of a man who understood that some arguments came from a place that outranked logic. "Talk to Captain Harlan," Briggs said. "It's his call." Captain Frank Harlan sat behind his desk with the rigid posture of a man who'd spent 30 years in the Navy and intended to spend the next 30 making sure everyone remembered it. He listened to Marcus's request without interrupting, which was either a good sign or the kind of silence that preceded a detonation. "You want to take personal custody of a military working dog that's been classified as a danger to handlers?" Harlan said. "Yes, sir." "A dog that's hospitalized 3 experienced canine personnel?" "Yes, sir." "A dog that every behavioral specialist on this base has declared unrehabilitable?" "They're wrong, sir." Harlan's eyes sharpened. That's a bold statement from a man with zero canine handling credentials. I'm not claiming credentials, sir. I'm claiming knowledge. I served with Storm's handler on 4 deployments. I watched that dog save lives in conditions that would break most animals on this base. I was present the night Chief Holt was killed. Marcus paused, steadied himself. That dog didn't come back broken because he's aggressive. He came back broken because he lost the only person he trusted, and nobody since then has understood what that means. And you do? I lost the same person he lost, sir, in the same place, on the same night. So yes, I think I understand it better than any behaviorist with a clipboard. Harlan studied him for a long time. Long enough for the clock on the wall to tick through 12 seconds of silence that felt like 12 minutes. 1 week, Harlan said. 7 days. If that dog shows any sign of progress, real, measurable progress, I'll extend the timeline. If he doesn't, or if he injures you or anyone else, the paperwork goes through immediately, and I'll process it myself. He leaned forward. And Reed, this goes sideways. It's on you. Not the dog, not the program. You. Understood, sir. Dismissed. Marcus walked out of Harlan's office and straight back to the canine compound. Storm was still standing in the center of his kennel, still rigid, still locked in that combat posture that said the war hadn't ended just because the mission was over. Marcus pulled a chair to the front of the kennel, sat down, placed his hands on his knees, and did nothing. He didn't speak, didn't extend his hand, didn't make eye contact. He just sat there, 3 feet from the mesh, breathing slowly, letting Storm process his presence without the pressure of commands or expectations. Storm growled, low, sustained, the kind of warning that said, "I will hurt you if you come closer." Marcus didn't move. An hour passed. Storm paced, growled, lunged at the gate once, a test, not an attack. Marcus didn't flinch. 2 hours. Storm stopped pacing, stood in the far corner, watching Marcus with an intensity that had shifted from threat assessment to something closer to confusion. This human wasn't leaving, wasn't speaking, wasn't trying to touch him or command him or fix him. He was just there. 3 hours. Storm lay down, not relaxed, coiled, ready, eyes still tracking Marcus, but down. It was the first time Briggs had seen the dog lie down in the presence of a human since Ironside's death. Marcus stood slowly, didn't approach the kennel, didn't say a word. He turned and walked away. Behind him, Storm let out a sound. Not a growl, not a bark, a whine. Short, sharp, involuntary. The sound of a dog who'd spent 6 weeks pushing every living thing away and was suddenly, briefly, confused about why this one left. Marcus stopped, closed his eyes, felt something crack open inside his chest that he'd been holding shut since the night he knelt beside Ironside's body and listened to the silence where his best friend's heartbeat used to be. "I'll be back tomorrow," Marcus said, without turning around. He walked to his truck, sat behind the wheel, and pressed his forehead against his hands. Storm had 6 days left. The behaviorists had failed. The handlers had failed. The entire apparatus of Naval Special Warfare's canine program had failed to reach a dog whose only crime was loving someone who died. Marcus started the engine. He knew where he had to go. He'd known since the moment he saw Storm's eyes through that kennel mesh. The same desperate, searching, inconsolable grief he saw every morning in his own mirror. He needed to drive 30 minutes off base to a quiet house where a woman named Jessica Tanner was raising her daughter alone, because a Navy SEAL named David Tanner and a dog named Scout had given everything on a mission that would stay classified for decades. And in that house, an 8-year-old girl named Lily knew something about broken warriors that no specialist, no handler, and no training manual had ever figured out. She knew that they didn't need to be fixed. They needed to be seen. Jessica Tanner opened the front door before Marcus reached the porch. She'd been expecting him. He'd called from the road, his voice carrying the particular flatness of a man trying to hold himself together long enough to ask for help. She looked the same as the last time he'd seen her, at David's memorial 14 months ago. Thinner, maybe. Harder around the edges in the way that grief sharpens people who refuse to collapse under it. Her eyes were steady, but tired. The permanent exhaustion of a woman who'd been carrying a family alone since a folded flag replaced the man who was supposed to help her carry it. "He's that bad?" Jessica asked. "Worse," Marcus said. "They're going to kill him in 6 days." Jessica was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. "She's out back." "Jess, I need you to understand what I'm asking. This dog has hospitalized 3 handlers. He's been declared a danger. If anything happens—" "Marcus!" She stopped him with a look that was equal parts warmth and iron. "David brought dogs home all the time. Dogs that bit. Dogs that wouldn't eat. Dogs that crawled under the porch and wouldn't come out for days. Lily sat with every single one of them. She learned from the best. David, and Scout." Her voice caught on the dog's name, a fracture so brief that if Marcus hadn't been listening for it, he would have missed it entirely. "Bring Storm tomorrow, early, before it gets hot." Marcus brought him at 7 the next morning, day 4 of his 7-day window. 3 days of silent visits to Storm's kennel had earned him exactly one thing. The dog no longer lunged at the gate when Marcus sat outside it. It wasn't trust. It wasn't even tolerance. It was the grudging acknowledgement of an animal who'd run out of the energy required to attack something that wouldn't react. Getting Storm into the truck had taken 40 minutes and cost Marcus a torn sleeve. The drive had been worse. Storm pressed against the far door, growling at every sound, every vibration, every shift in the air that his combat-wired brain interpreted as a threat. When Marcus opened the tailgate at the Tanner property, Storm hit the ground already scanning. His body was rigid, ears flat, tail low, muscles bunched so tight he looked like he might explode. The long lead in Marcus's hand pulled taut immediately as Storm lunged toward the fence line, then the driveway, then back toward the truck. A frantic, directionless circuit of an animal trying to secure a perimeter that existed only in his memory. "Easy," Marcus murmured. "Easy, boy." Storm didn't hear him. Storm hadn't heard anyone in 6 weeks. Then Lily's voice came from behind them. "Hi, Storm." 2 words. Soft. Calm. Carrying the quiet certainty of a child who'd learned that the loudest thing in the room was rarely the strongest. Storm froze. His entire body locked. Mid-stride, mid-breath, every muscle suspended. His ears rotated toward the voice before his head did. When he turned, his eyes found the girl, and something happened in them that Marcus had never seen. Not softening, not trust, but the faintest hesitation. A crack in the wall so small you could miss it if you blinked. Lily Tanner stood 10 feet away, 8 years old, dark hair pulled back. Her father's steady gaze looked out from her mother's face. She wore jeans and a t-shirt and sneakers with the laces half undone, and she held herself with the calm, grounded stillness of someone who'd already survived the worst thing life could throw at a child, and come out the other side, with her courage intact. She didn't flinch at Storm's size, didn't react to the growl that vibrated in his chest. She looked at him the way her father had taught her to look at wounded warriors, with respect, not fear. "You don't have to protect yourself right now," Lily said. "Nobody here is going to hurt you." Storm's growl faltered. Not stopped, faltered. A break in the frequency, like a radio signal losing its lock. "My dad had a dog like you," Lily continued, her voice steady and unhurried. "Scout. He was a Malinois. Bigger than you, actually, but don't tell him I said that." She almost smiled. "After bad missions, Scout would get like this. Not angry. Scared. But scared of things inside him, not things outside. Dad said that's the hardest kind of scared, because you can't run away from something that lives in your own head." Marcus felt his throat close. He'd heard David say those exact words. He'd heard them in a team room at 2 a.m, after a mission that had gone sideways and left everyone shaken, except the man who sat on the floor with his dog and talked about fear like it was something that deserved respect instead of shame. Lily sat down in the grass, slowly, deliberately. She placed her palm flat on the ground, open, empty, unthreatening. The exact technique David Tanner had taught her before she could read. "If you want to come close, that's okay," Lily said. "And if you don't, that's okay too." Marcus held the lead with both hands. Every muscle in his body was ready to intervene. If Storm lunged, if the dog's combat wiring misfired and registered this child as a threat, Storm took one step forward. Marcus stopped breathing. Another step. Then another. His body was still tense, still coiled with the potential for violence. But the violence was draining out of him with each step, like water leaving a vessel through a crack that had finally reached the waterline. He reached Lily, stood over her. His massive head was level with hers. His breath came in short, sharp bursts. His eyes, those wild, burning, inconsolable eyes, locked onto her face and held. Then Storm lowered his head and rested it in her lap. The sound that came from him destroyed Marcus Reed. A whine, broken, grieving, desperate, tore from Storm's chest with a force that shook his entire body. It wasn't aggression. It wasn't pain. It was 6 weeks of held grief, finally finding a place safe enough to exist. Storm pressed against Lily and trembled so hard Marcus could see it from 10 feet away. His paws scraped the ground. His breath hitched. His body curled toward this child, as if she were the first solid thing he'd found in an ocean that had been drowning him since the night the gunfire stopped, and the silence where Ironside's heartbeat used to be began. Lily's hand moved to his ears, small fingers against scarred fur. She stroked softly, the way her father had shown her. Slow, steady, with the kind of touch that doesn't ask for anything and offers everything. "You were brave," she whispered. "So was my dad. So was Scout. You did everything right." Marcus turned away. He pressed his fist against his mouth and fought a battle he'd been losing since the night he knelt beside Ironside's body in a compound on the other side of the world. Tears burned down his face. His chest heaved once, a single violent contraction, before he locked it down with the discipline of a man who'd been trained to function while breaking. Jessica stood behind the screen door. She didn't come out. She didn't need to. She watched her daughter hold a war dog and whisper the same words David used to whisper to Scout after missions that left everyone else speechless. And she pressed her hand against the doorframe and cried without making a sound. Lily came back every day. Day 5, she read to Storm from a book of adventure stories, the same ones David used to read to her before deployments. Storm lay beside her, head on his paws, eyes following her voice like it was a trail he could track. Day 6, she brought a tennis ball. Storm didn't chase it, but when Lily rolled it toward him gently, he picked it up in his mouth, carried it back, and dropped it at her feet. The first time he'd engaged with any object that wasn't a barrier or a person's arm in 6 weeks. "He's playing," Marcus said to Jessica, watching from the porch. His voice was thick. "He's actually playing." "He's not playing," Jessica said quietly. "He's remembering." She's giving him permission to remember that not everything in the world is a threat. Through Lily, Storm began to trust Marcus again. Not because of commands or discipline, but because the little girl who understood loss had vouched for him. She'd sit between them in the grass, one hand on Storm's head, the other resting near Marcus's knee, and the dog would look from one to the other, as if triangulating the only 2 points of safety left in his world. Day 7. The last day. Marcus was running out of time. Harlan's deadline was 12 hours away, and while Storm's improvement with Lily was undeniable, Marcus needed the dog to respond to him, directly, consistently, without the girl as a bridge. He set up a basic obedience drill in the Tanner's backyard. Lily watched from the porch. Jessica stood beside her. "Storm," Marcus said, "sit." The dog looked at him, looked at Lily, looked back at Marcus, and sat. Marcus's heart slammed against his ribs. "Down!" Storm lowered himself to the ground. Controlled. Clean. The kind of response that came from years of elite training that hadn't been erased, just buried beneath grief so deep it had blocked everything else. "Stay!" Storm stayed. His eyes stayed locked on Marcus. Not with aggression, not with fear, with the focused, steady attention of a military working dog who had found his handler. Marcus walked 20 yards away, turned. "Storm, come." The dog launched forward with the precision and speed of the elite operator he'd always been. He covered the distance in seconds and stopped at Marcus's side, sitting clean, eyes up, body vibrating with something Marcus hadn't seen in him before. Purpose. Marcus dropped to one knee. Storm pressed his head against Marcus's chest. Not the desperate, trembling collapse he'd given Lily that first day, but something steadier. Something that felt like the beginning of trust, rather than the release of grief. "Good boy," Marcus whispered. "Good boy." Then a car backfired on the road beyond the property. Storm snapped. Instantaneous. Total. The sound triggered every combat reflex in his body at once. He lunged, snarled, and hit Marcus in the chest with enough force to knock him flat on his back. His jaws were open, inches from Marcus's throat. His eyes were wild, gone, transported back to a rooftop ambush that would never stop replaying behind them. Marcus stared up at 90 pounds of trained killer and didn't move. Didn't shout. Didn't fight. He said one word. Ryan. Ironside's first name. The name no one on the teams used because everyone called him Ironside. The name only his family used. The name Storm had heard through closed doors and quiet evenings, and the private moments between a handler and his dog, when rank and call signs fell away, and they were just a man and the animal who loved him. Storm's jaws froze. His body went rigid. A tremor ran through him. Not aggression, but recognition. The name hit something deep inside his wiring, something beneath the combat training and the trauma and the 6 weeks of unprocessed anguish. His jaws closed. He backed off Marcus slowly, trembling, and pressed himself against the fence. A sound came from his chest. Not a growl, not a bark. a broken, keening whine that carried the full weight of a dog who had just been reminded of the person he'd lost and couldn't find. Marcus sat up. Blood ran from a scratch on his forearm where Storm's paw had caught him. He ignored it. He stayed in the dirt and waited. Lily hadn't moved from the porch. Jessica's hand was on her shoulder, tight, protective. But Lily's face wasn't afraid. It was something else. Something that looked like understanding so deep it shouldn't have been possible in someone her age. 20 minutes passed. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Then Storm crawled toward Marcus on his belly. Slowly. Painfully. Every inch a surrender of the walls he'd built. He reached Marcus's boot and rested his head on it. The same way he'd rested his head on Ironside's boot 1,000 times, in 100 places, across 3 deployments, and countless nights when the world was too loud and the only safe ground was the space next to the person who would never leave. Marcus put his hand on Storm's head. The dog flinched, then settled, then exhaled, long, shuddering, the breath of an animal who had finally stopped fighting. Marcus looked at Lily. She was crying. Silently, the way children cry when they understand something too big for their body to hold, without leaking. "He's going to be okay," Lily said. Not a question, a statement, a declaration from a girl who had watched warriors break and believed with everything she had that broken things could be put back together. Marcus closed his eyes, felt Storm's heartbeat through the fur beneath his palm, felt his own heartbeat answering it, steady, fierce, the rhythm of a man who had just found the reason he'd been looking for to stop surviving and start living again. "Yeah," Marcus said. "He's going to be okay." And for the first time since the night Ironside died, Marcus believed it. Captain Harlem stood at the edge of the training yard with his arms crossed and his expression locked in the particular neutrality that military commanders use when they've already made up their mind and are waiting for evidence to confirm it. Marcus walked Storm to the center of the field. No leash, no muzzle. Just a 30-year-old SEAL in his NWU Type 3 and a German Shepherd whose tan and black coat caught the morning sun as he moved beside his handler, with a focus that made Briggs, watching from the fence line, shake his head in disbelief. "This is the same dog?" Briggs muttered to no one. Harlan said nothing. His eyes tracked every movement. "Storm," Marcus said. "Sit." Storm sat. Clean, immediate. Ears forward, eyes locked on Marcus. "Down." Storm lowered himself, controlled, precise, muscles coiled, but disciplined. The posture of a working dog awaiting the next command, not a broken animal waiting for the world to attack him. "Stay." Marcus walked 50 yards across the field, turned, paused for 3 full seconds, an eternity in canine evaluation, long enough for an unstable dog to break position, lose focus, or revert. Storm didn't move. His gaze never left Marcus. His body vibrated with readiness, but held like concrete. "Storm, come." The dog exploded forward, 90 pounds of trained precision covering 50 yards in under 5 seconds, legs driving, ears flat against the wind, the devastating speed of an animal built for exactly this kind of work. He reached Marcus and stopped, sitting clean at his handler's left side, eyes up, chest heaving, tail giving one controlled wag. Marcus looked at Harlan. Harlan uncrossed his arms. "Controlled engagement," he said. Marcus nodded to Briggs, who stepped onto the field wearing a bite suit, 70 pounds of protective padding that made him look like a walking mattress. He advanced toward Marcus at a run, playing the role of a hostile threat. "Storm, engage!" The German Shepherd launched, No hesitation, no misdirection. He hit Briggs center mass with enough force to drive the handler back 3 steps, jaws locking onto the suit arm with the controlled, sustained bite that training manuals described but most dogs never perfected. Briggs struggled. Storm adjusted, repositioned, maintained his hold without escalating to damage. "Storm, out!" The dog released instantly, backed off 2 steps, sat, watched the threat with burning intensity, but didn't advance, waiting for his handler's command. Controlled, disciplined, lethal if necessary, perfectly restrained. Briggs pulled off his helmet and stared at Storm with an expression Marcus had never seen on the veteran handler's face, something between awe and embarrassment. "That was textbook," Briggs said. "Better than textbook. That was the best controlled engagement I've seen from any canine on this base in 10 years. Harlan walked onto the field. He stopped 3 feet from Storm and studied the dog for a long time. Storm held his position, sitting at Marcus's side, calm, alert, not a trace of the feral aggression that had terrorized the kennel compound for 6 weeks. "How?" Harlan said. "Sir? How did you do this?" Behaviorists with decades of experience couldn't reach him. Handlers who've worked with the most difficult dogs in the program couldn't get within arm's length without being attacked. He looked at Marcus. "What did you do?" Marcus thought about Lily sitting in the grass with her palm open. He thought about an 8-year-old girl whispering to a grieving war dog that it was okay to stop fighting. He thought about David Tanner's steady eyes looking out from his daughter's face, and the legacy of a man who taught his child that broken warriors needed understanding, not force. "I didn't do it alone, sir," Marcus said. "I had help." Harlan waited for more. Marcus didn't offer it. Some things didn't belong in evaluations. "He stays," Harlan said finally. "Reinstated. Full operational status. Assigned to you as permanent handler." He paused. "Don't make me regret this, Reed." "You won't, sir." Marcus drove straight to the Tanner house. Storm rode in the passenger seat, not pressed against the far door, not growling, but sitting upright, nose near the cracked window, ears working the air the way a dog's ears work when the world has stopped being an enemy and started being interesting again. When they pulled into the driveway, Lily was on the porch. She stood the moment she saw the truck, her book falling from her lap, her face carrying a question she was too afraid to ask out loud. Marcus got out, opened the passenger door. Storm jumped down and moved toward Lily with the gentle, purposeful stride that he only showed around her. Head lowered, body soft, tail wagging with the quiet confidence of a dog who had found the one person in the world he didn't need to be strong for. "He passed," Marcus said. "He's reinstated. He's mine." Lily dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around Storm's neck. The dog pressed into her, his tail sweeping wide arcs, a sound coming from his chest that wasn't a growl or a whine, but something in between. The rough, untranslatable noise of an animal experiencing joy he'd forgotten was possible. "I told you," Lily whispered into his fur. "I told you you'd be okay." Jessica appeared in the doorway. She looked at Marcus, then at her daughter holding the dog, and her eyes filled with something that wasn't quite tears, but lived in the same neighborhood. "David would have loved this," she said softly. "He'd have said, 'About time,'" Marcus replied. Jessica almost laughed. Almost. It was a Saturday, warm, quiet, the kind of afternoon that convinces you the worst is over and the world has decided to be gentle for a while. Marcus and Storm walked the property perimeter while Lily read on the porch and Jessica worked in the garden. Old habits, men who'd spent careers staying alert, didn't turn it off because the sun was shining. Storm moved beside Marcus with easy discipline, nose working, ears rotating, body relaxed, but never fully off duty. He checked fence lines and tree lines and the edge of the driveway where it met the road, cataloging, sorting, filing away everything the way military working dogs do, because the world is always a mission, and every mission has a perimeter. Marcus was watching Storm investigate a rabbit trail along the back fence, when the scream cut through the afternoon like a blade through silk. His head snapped up. Every nerve in his body fired at once. The instantaneous, full-spectrum activation that 8 years of SEAL operations had wired into him so deep it would never come out. Lily's scream. Marcus was running before the echo died. Storm was ahead of him, already locked on, already moving, the lazy afternoon dog gone, replaced in a heartbeat by the combat canine who'd cleared buildings and taken down armed combatants in conditions that would break most animals on Earth. They came around the side of the house, and Marcus's vision narrowed to a single point. A man had Lily by the arm, dragging her toward a vehicle parked at the property's edge. He was in his 40s, heavy-set, wearing a dark jacket and moving with the desperate urgency of someone who knew they had seconds before the situation became unrecoverable. Jessica was running from the garden, screaming, her hands covered in dirt, her face twisted with a terror so primal it didn't look human. "Storm!" Marcus commanded, and the word came out of him not as a shout, but as a detonation. Every ounce of authority and fury and protective rage compressed into a single syllable. Storm launched. 90 pounds of German Shepherd covered the distance in a blur of tan and black that ate the ground like it was fuel. His focus was absolute. Eyes locked, ears flat, body low and driving. The devastating acceleration of an animal who had been built and trained for exactly this moment. The man saw him coming. His face changed, the aggression draining to terror in less than a second. He released Lily and stumbled backward, arms coming up, but it was too late by the time his brain processed the threat. Storm hit him with the force of a freight car. Controlled, precise, exactly the way he'd hit the bite suit that morning, except this wasn't training, and the target wasn't padded. His jaws clamped onto the man's forearm. The man screamed, a high, ragged sound that shattered against the afternoon like glass. He thrashed, swung his free arm, tried to kick. Storm didn't budge. His body pinned the man to the ground with absolute authority, every muscle locked, jaw pressure sustained at exactly the level required to immobilize without killing. But Storm's eyes, his eyes weren't on the man beneath him. They were on Lily. Even while restraining a grown man with the precision of an elite military working dog, Storm tracked the girl with the same fierce protectiveness he'd once given Ironside. Checking, guarding, making sure the threat hadn't reached the person who mattered most. Marcus was there in 4 seconds. He grabbed the man's free arm, wrenched it behind his back, and pinned it with a knee. Military training taking over. Control the threat, secure the area, protect the asset. "Don't move," Marcus said, and his voice carried something colder and more dangerous than any command he'd ever given in combat. Jessica had Lily. She'd scooped her daughter off the ground and was holding her so tight that Marcus could see her arm shaking from 10 feet away. Lily was crying, not screaming, not hysterical, but the deep, shuddering sobs of a child who'd been grabbed by a stranger and pulled toward a car and understood exactly what that meant. "Who are you?" Marcus demanded, pressing the man harder into the ground. The man cursed, struggled. Storm's jaw tightened by a fraction, and the struggling stopped immediately. "Dale Wyatt!" Jessica shouted from behind Marcus. Her voice was raw, shaking, furious. "He's David's cousin. He's been trying to get David's benefits since the funeral. He's been sending threats for months. I filed a restraining order and he—" Her voice broke. "He said I'd regret it. He said he'd take what he was owed." Marcus felt something shift inside him, a cold, precise fury that he'd only felt in combat, when the line between discipline and destruction became so thin that only training kept him on the right side of it. "Storm, hold," Marcus said. Calm, controlled. The voice of a man who trusted his dog to do exactly what was needed, and nothing more. Storm held. Perfectly. Not a millimeter of movement. Not a fraction of increased pressure. Just absolute, unwavering restraint on a man who'd tried to take a child from her mother. Police arrived in 9 minutes. Wyatt was handcuffed, bleeding from the arm where Storm's bite had broken skin, but not bone. Controlled force, exact calibration. The difference between a trained military working dog and a weapon without a safety. An officer took Jessica's statement. Another photographed the scene. A third opened Wyatt's vehicle and found surveillance photos. Dozens of them, taken over weeks. The Tanner house from multiple angles. Jessica's car, Lily's school. Routes, schedules, patterns. This wasn't a crime of impulse. This was a plan that had been building for months. "He was stalking us," Jessica whispered, staring at the photograph spread across the officer's hood. Her face was white. "He was watching Lily, watching her school." Marcus stood behind her. Storm sat at his side, calm now, the combat intensity settling back into the steady vigilance of a dog who had done his job and was ready to do it again if the world required it. His eye still tracked Lily, who sat on the porch steps wrapped in the blanket a neighbor had brought. Her face tear-streaked but steady, one hand reaching down to touch Storm's head every time he came close enough. "Ma'am, we'll need you to come in tomorrow for a full statement," the officer said. "Based on the evidence in the vehicle, this is going beyond simple violation of a restraining order. We're looking at stalking charges, attempted kidnapping, and—" "I want NCIS," Marcus said. The officer looked at him. "Sir?" "She's the widow of a senior chief petty officer killed in action. She's receiving military death benefits. The suspect is contesting those benefits through the courts and has now attempted to kidnap her daughter to use as leverage. This involves military personnel and military benefits. It falls under NCIS jurisdiction." The officer hesitated, then nodded. "I'll make the call." After the police left, after the neighbors went home, after the driveway was empty and the house was quiet in the way that only houses that have just survived something terrible can be quiet, Marcus found Jessica in the kitchen. She was standing at the sink, not washing anything, not doing anything, just standing there with her hands flat on the counter, shaking. Marcus didn't speak. He walked to where she was standing and lowered himself to the floor, his back against the cabinet. Storm followed, lying between them. Jessica looked down at the seal sitting on her kitchen floor, and at the dog who just saved her daughter, and something inside her that had been holding for 14 months finally couldn't hold anymore. She slid down the cabinet until she was sitting beside Marcus. Her shoulder touched his. Storm shifted, resting his head on her knee. Jessica pressed her hand into the dog's fur and broke open. Not loud, not dramatic, but deep, shaking. The kind of crying that comes from a place that words can't reach and comfort can only witness. "I've been fighting him alone," she said between breaths. 14 months. The letters, the threats, the court hearings. I didn't tell anyone because David would have handled it, and David's not here, and I thought I had to handle it myself. "You don't," Marcus said. "Not anymore." Jessica pressed her face against Storm's neck. The dog didn't move. He let her hold him the way he'd let Lily hold him that first day. Completely, openly, with the patient stillness of a warrior who understood that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was simply be present while someone else fell apart. Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway. She looked at her mother crying. She looked at Marcus on the floor. She looked at Storm, steady and warm between them. She crossed the kitchen and sat down on the other side of Storm. Her small hand found her mother's hand on the dog's back. Their fingers interlaced. "We're okay, Mom," Lily said. "Storm kept us safe." Jessica pulled her daughter close. Storm adjusted, pressing against both of them. A living bridge between a mother's terror and a child's courage, holding them together with nothing but his body and the unshakable loyalty of a dog who had finally found something worth protecting again. And Marcus Reed, sitting on a kitchen floor in a dead friend's house, felt the ice that had been living inside his chest since the night Ironside died begin, slowly, painfully, irreversibly, to thaw. NCIS arrived at the Tanner house Monday morning. 2 agents, a man named Garrett, with the kind of face that gave nothing away, and a woman named Chen, who carried a tablet like a weapon and asked questions the way surgeons made incisions. Precise, deep, and without apology. Jessica sat at the kitchen table and told them everything. 14 months of harassment compressed into 90 minutes of testimony that left even the agents, trained to absorb human darkness without reacting, visibly unsettled. It had started 3 weeks after David's funeral. Dale Wyatt showed up at the house unannounced, claiming David had promised him money. Jessica asked him to leave. He refused. She closed the door. He came back the next day, and the next. He said David owed him $50,000, Jessica told the agents. Her voice was controlled, but her hands gripped the coffee mug so hard her fingers were white. "A loan from years ago." There was no loan. David never borrowed money from anyone. But Wyatt had debts, gambling, bad investments, and when David died and the death benefits and life insurance were processed, Wyatt decided he was entitled to a share. "You contested in court?" Garrett asked. 3 times. Denied 3 times. He had no documentation, no proof of any loan. The judge threw it out each time. Jessica paused. That's when the letters started. The letters were in a box Jessica kept in her bedroom closet. She'd saved every one, not out of sentimentality, but out of the survival instinct of a woman who'd learned that evidence was the only thing the legal system respected. 17 letters over 8 months. The first few were legal threats. Vague, blustering, the kind of language people use when they're trying to intimidate without crossing a line. Then the tone changed. "I know where she goes to school," Chen read aloud from one of the later letters. Her expression didn't change, but her voice tightened on the words. "I know what time you pick her up. I know you're alone." Marcus stood against the kitchen wall, arms crossed, jaw locked. Storm sat at his feet, head up, ears tracking the conversation with the focused attention of a dog who understood tension even when he couldn't understand words. Every time Jessica's voice wavered, Storm's head turned toward her. Every time she paused, his tail thumped once against the floor. Steady, grounding, present. "Why didn't you report the escalation?" Garrett asked. Jessica looked at him with the tired patience of a woman who'd been failed by every system designed to protect her. "I did. I filed a restraining order. I called the police 4 times. They took reports. They documented incidents. They told me to call back if anything happened." Her voice hardened. "Something happened. He tried to take my daughter. And the only reason she's sitting in the next room right now, instead of in the back of his car, is because a dog that the Navy wanted to destroy got to him before he got to her." The room was quiet for a long time after that. Chen closed her tablet. The surveillance photographs in his vehicle, combined with the restraining order violations, the threatening correspondence, and the attempted abduction, give us enough for federal charges. The military benefit angle brings this under our jurisdiction. "What happens to him?" Marcus asked. He's being held without bail. The judge considered him a flight risk based on the evidence and the severity of the charges. Chen looked at Jessica. Mrs. Tanner, this man will not be released pending trial. We'll ensure a permanent protection order is issued, and a victim advocate will be assigned to your family. After the agents left, the house settled into the heavy silence that follows the official acknowledgement of things that have been endured alone for too long. Jessica stood at the kitchen sink again, the same spot where she'd broken down 2 nights ago. But this time, she didn't shake. She stared out the window at the backyard, where Lily was throwing a tennis ball for Storm. 14 months, she said, without turning around. I carried this for 14 months. Marcus moved to the counter beside her. Not too close. Close enough. David would have... She stopped, swallowed, started again. David would have handled it in one conversation. He would have walked up to Wyatt's door and stood there, and that would have been the end of it. Not because David was violent. Because David was the kind of man who made you understand, just by looking at him, that there were consequences. I know, Marcus said. I served with that man. I know exactly who he was. Jessica turned and looked at him, really looked, the kind of searching, unguarded examination that only happens between people who've been stripped down to the truth by circumstances neither of them chose. You were there, she said, the night he died. It wasn't a question. Marcus had never told her, but Jessica Tanner was married to a SEAL for 11 years. She knew how to read the spaces between words, the things men didn't say, the weight they carried in their posture instead of their vocabulary. Yes, Marcus said. I was 15 feet away. How long have you been carrying that? Marcus looked at the backyard. Storm was lying in the grass, Lily's head resting on his side, both of them still and peaceful in the afternoon light. He watched the dog's ribs rise and fall, the steady rhythm of an animal who had learned, through the patience of a child, that the world could be safe again. Since the night it happened, Marcus said, I heard the rounds hit him. I heard Storm whine. I was close enough to... His throat closed. He fought through it. I keep thinking if I'd moved faster, if I'd been 2 steps closer, if I... Stop! Jessica's voice was sharp. Not angry. Firm. The way a person speaks when they've heard the same words before and know exactly where they lead. David said that to me once, she said. After a mission where he lost a teammate. He sat right where you're standing and said, I keep thinking if I'd been faster. I told him the same thing I'm going to tell you. She stepped closer. Her eyes held his. You didn't fail him, Marcus. You survived him. And surviving is harder. The words hit Marcus in a place he'd spent 14 months fortifying against exactly this kind of assault. The walls he'd built. Discipline, composure, mission focus. The stoic architecture of a man trained to function while everything inside him was on fire. Cracked. Not dramatically. Quietly. The way real walls crack. One fracture spreading slowly until the structure can't hold its own weight anymore. He pressed his hand against the counter, looked at the ceiling, fought it the way he'd fought everything since that night, with the stubborn, silent endurance of a man who believed that falling apart was a failure he couldn't afford. It's not weakness, Jessica said softly. David cried that night. He sat right here and he cried. And then he went back to work the next morning, and he saved people. Because he let himself feel it. He didn't try to outrun it. Marcus broke. Not the loud, dramatic collapse that movies show. The real kind. The kind that starts with a breath that won't come, and continues with a jaw that won't stay locked, and ends with a man pressing his forehead against a kitchen counter, while tears burn tracks down his face for the first time since the night he knelt beside his best friend's body in a compound that smelled like gunpowder and blood, and the end of everything he'd believed about being strong enough to keep the people he loved alive. Storm appeared from nowhere. He pushed through the kitchen door, crossed the room, and pressed his body against Marcus's leg with a force that said, "I'm here," in the only language the dog had ever needed. His nose pushed into Marcus's hand. His weight settled, warm, steady, immovable, against the man who'd saved him from destruction, who'd fought for his life when the Navy wanted to end it, who'd brought him to a little girl in a backyard and given him permission to grieve. Now the dog was returning the favor. Marcus's hand found Storm's head. His fingers sank into the fur between the dog's ears. The warmth was real. The heartbeat was real. The presence of an animal who'd been to the darkest place grief could take a living thing and fought his way back. That was real too. "He knows," Jessica said, watching them. "He's been where you are. He understands it." Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway. She looked at Marcus's face, the tears, the cracked composure, the raw humanity bleeding through a uniform that was supposed to armor against exactly this. And she didn't look away. She didn't look uncomfortable. She looked at him the way she'd looked at Storm that first day in the backyard, with recognition. She walked across the kitchen, stood beside Marcus, and placed her small hand on top of his where it rested on Storm's head. "It's okay to be sad," she said. The same words she'd said to Storm. The same calm, steady, impossibly wise voice. "My dad used to say that being brave doesn't mean you don't cry. It means you cry, and then you keep going." Marcus looked down at this child, 8 years old, standing in her dead father's kitchen, comforting a combat veteran with words her father taught her, and understood something that no training, no deployment, no mission brief had ever made clear. Strength wasn't the ability to withstand everything without breaking. Strength was what you did after you broke. It was the crawling, the reaching, the hand on the dog's head, and the child's fingers on top of yours, and the widow who looked you in the eye and said, "Surviving is harder," because she knew. She'd been surviving every single day since a folded flag replaced her husband. "Thank you," Marcus whispered. He didn't know if he was talking to Lily or Jessica or Storm or David Tanner's ghost or God or all of them at once. It didn't matter. The gratitude was big enough to cover everyone in the room and still have enough left over for the man who wasn't there anymore, but whose lessons were still saving people. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood in Captain Harlan's office again. This time he wasn't asking for permission. He was receiving something he hadn't expected. "Naval Special Warfare is documenting Storm's rehabilitation as a model case," Harlan said. He was sitting straighter than usual, which meant something significant was about to be communicated, and he wanted the posture to match. "Your approach, connection over force, patience over commands. It's being incorporated into the Canine Handler training program across the command." Marcus blinked. "Sir?" The behavioral science team reviewed the entire timeline. Storm's regression, his violence, his refusal to engage, and then his complete rehabilitation in under a week through non-traditional methods. Harlan paused. "They want to implement it as a formal protocol for military working dogs exhibiting combat stress behaviors. They're calling it the Reed-Tanner method." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Not the crack of breaking, the opposite. The feeling of something that had been broken, beginning to set correctly. "It shouldn't be named after me, sir," Marcus said. "It should be named after an 8-year-old girl who sat in the grass and told a war dog it was okay to be sad." Harlan studied him. "The base commander wants to send a letter to the family, officially recognizing their contribution to the military working dog program." "Lily won't understand why it's a big deal," Marcus said. She'll say she didn't do anything special. Then you'll explain it to her. He did. That Saturday, on the Tanners' porch, with Storm lying between them and Jessica listening from the doorway, Marcus read the letter to Lily. It was written on official Navy letterhead, signed by the base commander, and it thanked Lily Tanner for her extraordinary service to the military working dog program and her contribution to the rehabilitation of MWD Storm. Lily listened. Then she looked confused. "I didn't do anything special," she said. "I just sat with him." Marcus set the letter down. He lowered himself to one knee so he was level with her eyes. David's eyes, steady and sure, and carrying a courage that most adults would never match. "Lily, every handler on that base tried to reach Storm with training and commands and force. They used every protocol, every technique, every tool they had. And he fought all of them." Marcus held her gaze. "You reached him by sitting in the grass and telling him it was okay to grieve. You didn't try to fix him. You didn't try to control him. You just let him know he wasn't alone. That's not nothing, Lily. That's everything." Lily looked at Storm. The dog looked back at her with the calm, unwavering devotion that had replaced the wild desperation of 6 weeks ago. His tail moved once. His eyes held the same thing they always held when he looked at the girl who'd saved him. A trust so complete and so permanent that nothing in the world would ever shake it. "Dad taught me that," Lily said softly. "He said warriors don't need to be fixed. They need to be seen." Marcus nodded. His throat was too tight to speak. Jessica stepped off the porch and sat down beside her daughter. She pulled Lily close, pressing her lips to the top of her head. Storm shifted, resting his chin on Lily's knee, and Jessica's hand found the dog's ear, stroking softly. "David would be so proud of you," Jessica whispered. "He already is," Lily said. "I can feel it." And Marcus Reed, kneeling on a dead friend's porch beside a dog the Navy wanted to destroy and a family that had been carrying grief and danger alone for 14 months, felt something he hadn't felt since the night the gunfire stopped and the silence began. He felt like he'd come home, not to a place, not to a building, but to the people and the dog and the quiet, stubborn, unbreakable love that refuses to let go no matter how hard the world tries to shake it loose. Storm pressed his weight against Marcus's knee, warm, steady, present. One thump of the tail against the porch. That was enough. It had always been enough. 3 months later, Marcus Reed and Storm came home from their first operational deployment together. They'd cleared buildings in conditions that would have broken lesser teams. Storm had detected 2 IEDs that would have killed every man walking behind him. He'd tracked a high-value target through 12 miles of mountain terrain in darkness so complete that even night vision struggled to cut through it. And he'd done all of it with the seamless, devastating precision of a dog who had found his handler and decided, with the quiet finality that only animals possess, that this partnership was permanent. Marcus drove straight from the base to the Tanner house. Not to debriefing, not to barracks, to the quiet property where an 8-year-old girl would be sitting on a porch with a book in her lap and her father's steady eyes watching the driveway. Storm knew where they were going. The moment the truck turned onto the familiar road, his ears lifted, his tail began to move, and a sound came from his chest. Not a growl, not a whine, but the soft, anticipatory huff of a dog who associated this particular stretch of asphalt with the safest place in his world. Marcus pulled into the driveway, cut the engine, opened the passenger door. Storm hit the ground and moved toward the porch with the gentle, purposeful stride that he reserved for exactly one person. Head lowered, body soft, tail sweeping wide arcs, every trace of the combat canine dissolving into something simpler, and truer. A dog coming home to his girl. Lily was already on her feet. Her book hit the porch floor. She didn't run. She moved with the deliberate calm her father had taught her, the measured approach that respected a working dog's space while making it absolutely clear that the space she occupied was his too. "You came back," she whispered, dropping to her knees. Storm pressed into her so hard she almost tipped over. His head buried into her neck. His whole body trembled, not with fear or grief, but with the overwhelming relief of an animal who had learned that the people he loved could leave and still return. His tail hammered the porch with a rhythm that sounded like celebration. Lily wrapped her arms around his neck and held on with the fierce, total commitment of a child who understood, from the deepest place a person can understand things, that some bonds don't break just because the world tries to break them. "I knew you would," she said into his fur. "I told Mom. I said, Storm always comes back now." Marcus stood by the truck and watched them. His throat was tight. His eyes burned. 3 months of controlled operations, disciplined emotions, and combat-grade composure. And the thing that cracked him open was an 8-year-old girl hugging a dog on a porch. Jessica appeared in the doorway. She looked different. Not transformed, but settled. The constant vigilance that had sharpened her features for 14 months had eased into something that resembled peace. Wyatt's trial had concluded 6 weeks ago. Guilty on all counts: stalking, attempted kidnapping, violation of a protective order, harassment. 10 years. The judge had looked at the surveillance photographs, the threatening letters, the testimony of NCIS agents and police officers, and an 8-year-old girl who'd described being grabbed by a man she'd been taught to call Uncle, and he'd handed down the maximum sentence without hesitation. The protection order was permanent. The threats were over. For the first time since the folded flag, Jessica Tanner could lock her door at night and believe it was enough. She met Marcus's eyes across the yard. Something passed between them. Not the electric charge of romance, but the quiet recognition of two people who had walked through the same darkness at different times and found themselves standing in the same light. Whatever existed between them was built on shared grief and mutual respect, and the kind of trust that doesn't rush because it doesn't need to. It would grow in its own time, at its own pace, rooted in something real enough to hold weight. "You look tired," Jessica said. "You look rested," Marcus replied. She almost smiled. "First time in 14 months. She held the door open. "Come inside. I made coffee." "Jess, I just came from—" "I know where you came from, and I know you drove here before you went anywhere else. So come inside, drink the coffee, and let your dog play with my daughter." Marcus looked at Storm, who was lying on his back on the porch while Lily rubbed his belly with both hands and laughed. A sound so pure and so free of fear that it made the air feel different. The dog's tongue hung sideways out of his mouth. His tail swept the porch boards. His eyes were half closed, with the absolute bliss of an animal who had forgotten what happiness felt like and was rediscovering it, one belly rub at a time. "Yeah," Marcus said. "Okay." Inside, the house smelled like coffee and something baking. Marcus sat at the kitchen table. David's table. The same table where Jessica had given her testimony to NCIS. The same table where she'd told Marcus that surviving was harder than failing, and wrapped his hands around a mug that was warm enough to make the last 3 months feel further away than they were. Jessica sat across from him. "How was it?" "Good. Clean. Storm was—" He shook his head. "He was perfect, Jess. Every mission, every scenario, every time I needed him, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Better than before. Better than anyone expected." "Not better than Lily expected," Jessica said. "No, not better than Lily expected. Jessica looked at him for a long moment. David's commander called last week. He said they're naming the canine rehabilitation protocol after you. After Lily, Marcus corrected. I told Harlan that. It should be named after her. They compromised. The Reed-Tanner protocol. Jessica paused. David would have laughed at that. His daughter getting a military protocol named after her at 8 years old. Her eyes glistened, but didn't overflow. She'd made her peace with the tears. They came when they came, and she let them, because fighting them was harder than flowing with them. He would have been so proud, not of the protocol, of her. He is, Marcus said. Wherever he is, he is. Lily came through the door with Storm at her side. The dog moved into the kitchen with the easy confidence of an animal who knew this house, knew these people, knew that nothing inside these walls would ever require his combat training. He settled at Marcus's feet with a sigh and rested his chin on his boot. Lily climbed into the chair beside her mother and looked at Marcus with an expression that carried a question she'd clearly been holding since she saw the truck pull in. "Did you bring it?" she asked. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph. It was taken at a forward operating base. Marcus, in his NWU Type 3, crouched beside Storm, who wore his working harness with ears forward and eyes sharp. Behind them, a sunset painted the sky in colors that didn't belong in a war zone, but showed up anyway, because beauty doesn't check the security clearance of the places it decides to appear. "For your collection," Marcus said, handing it to her. Lily held the photograph with both hands. She studied it the way children study things that matter. Carefully, completely, with a full attention that adults forget how to give because they've learned to divide it among too many things. She slid off her chair and walked to the living room. Marcus and Jessica followed. Storm followed them all. The mantel held 2 photographs. The first was David Tanner in his uniform, Scout at his side. Both of them squared up, ready, carrying the unmistakable bearing of a man and a dog who would walk into any darkness the mission required. The second was Lily sitting in the grass with Storm beside her, his head resting in her lap, taken by Jessica on the first day, the moment that saved his life. Lily placed the new photograph beside them. 3 frames, 3 stories, 3 moments that connected across time and loss and the kind of love that doesn't end when a heartbeat stops. She stood back and looked at them. Her father, her dog, her friend. "There," she said, satisfied, complete. Jessica pressed her hand to her mouth. Marcus looked at the ceiling, because looking at anything else would have finished him. Storm sat beside Lily and leaned against her leg. His eyes reflected the photographs. Or maybe they reflected something deeper, something that lived in the space between a dog's loyalty and a child's courage, and a family that had been broken and rebuilt, and was standing, still standing, in a house that held both grief and grace in equal measure. That evening, Marcus sat on the porch with Storm at his feet. The sky was turning the kind of orange and gold that happens when the day decides to leave beautifully instead of just leaving. Lily was inside helping Jessica with dinner. Through the screen door came the sounds of plates clinking, quiet conversation, the ordinary music of people who were safe and together and no longer afraid. Storm rested his head on Marcus's boot, the same position he'd taken that day in the dirt when he'd crawled back to Marcus after the backfire. But there was no trembling now, no fear, no grief coiled behind his eyes waiting to detonate. Just the steady, warm, absolute presence of a dog who had been to the darkest place an animal can go and found his way back, because a little girl sat in the grass and told him it was okay. Marcus scratched the spot between Storm's ears. You know what Ironside would say if he could see you right now? Storm's ear tilted. He'd say, "About damn time, you stubborn mutt. I've been waiting for you to figure it out." Storm huffed through his nose. His tail thumped once. Marcus looked at the sky and thought about Ryan Holt, about David Tanner, about Scout and every warrior, two-legged and four, who gave everything and left behind people who had to figure out how to carry the weight without them. He thought about Lily, 8 years old, sitting in the grass with her palm open, reaching through walls that 5 handlers, 3 behaviorists, and the entire apparatus of naval special warfare couldn't breach. Reaching with nothing but her father's lessons and her own courage, and the quiet, unshakable belief that broken things deserve patience, not punishment. You weren't saved by training, Marcus said to Storm. You weren't saved by commands or protocols or any program in any manual. You were saved by a little girl who understood something every adult in your life missed. Storm looked up at him. Those dark, steady eyes, once wild, once burning, once so full of rage and grief that they couldn't see anything except the war that never stopped replaying behind them, held something different now. Not emptiness, not the manufactured calm of a dog conditioned into compliance. Something alive and warm and permanent. Trust, given freely, earned slowly, held fiercely. She knew you didn't need to be fixed, Marcus whispered. She knew you needed to be seen. Storm's tail thumped once against the porch. Once was enough. It had always been enough. The screen door opened. Lily poked her head out. "Dinner's ready. Mom says you have to eat at the table like a human being." Marcus smiled. Small. Real. The kind that cost him something because he'd been rationing them for so long he'd almost forgotten they were free. "Tell your mom I'll be right in." "Storm can come too. Mom put his bowl by the table." "He's got a bowl here?" Lily gave him a look. David's look. The one that said obviously without saying a word. "He's had a bowl here since the 2nd week. Where have you been?" She disappeared inside. Marcus looked at Storm. Storm looked at Marcus. The dog's tail wagged, twice this time, because the occasion called for generosity. "Apparently you live here now," Marcus said. Storm stood, shook himself once, and walked to the door. He paused, looked back at Marcus, and waited. Patient, steady, ready. Marcus followed him inside. The door closed behind them. Through the window, the last light caught the porch and held it for a moment. Empty now, but warm, the way places stay warm after they've held people who matter. On the mantel, 3 photographs stood side by side. A father and his dog, ready for war. A girl and her dog, learning peace. A man and his dog, coming home. 3 stories. 1 truth. Sometimes the most powerful force in the world isn't strength or speed or tactical precision. It's a child sitting in the grass with her hand open, telling a broken warrior that it's okay to stop fighting. Warriors don't need to be fixed. They need to be seen. They need to know their service mattered. They need to remember they're not alone. David Tanner taught his daughter that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's showing up anyway. It's offering trust when trust has been shattered. It's believing that broken things can be made whole again. He taught her that warriors come in many forms. Some wear uniforms and carry rifles. Some walk on 4 legs and track enemies through darkness. And some are 8 years old, sitting in the grass, reading stories to a dog who has forgotten how to feel safe. All of them deserve honor. All of them deserve to be remembered. All of them deserve someone who refuses to give up on them. If there is someone in your life who is carrying a wound you cannot see, do not try to fix them with force. Sit with them. Be patient. Let them know they are not fighting alone. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't charging into battle. It's sitting in the grass and saying, if you want to come close, that's okay. And if you don't, that's okay too. God bless our warriors. God bless the families who carry on after they're gone. God bless every bond, spoken or silent, human or animal, that proves love is stronger than any wound the world can inflict. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave a comment. Tell us where you're watching from. And remember, true courage isn't never falling down. It's finding the strength to rise again and helping others do the same. That's what heroes do. That's what Storm and Lily proved. That's the legacy every warrior leaves behind.